I'm kind of excited a little bit to push back on a lot of Real Madrid discourse. And I saw a lot of things like, we're proud of this team, and I'm so glad we sent Zizou off with a win, and proud of Modric. I just think I think we have to zoom out for a second and remember that this was a long season. This league was lost a long time ago. It wasn't lost today. We dropped a ton of points against teams we weren't supposed to drop points against. And mind you, when we had all of our best players available, this was happening. So I just don't want to pretend that just because we won today and we did all we could. No, we should have done way more before this. So I'm not in that mindset right now where I'm holding hands and saying I'm really proud of this team. I think we have a lot of questions to be answered. I think we need to build this squad way better than we built it so far. But beyond that, beyond the top-down approach, the macro scale, the signings, the squad building, and even the coaching, even on a micro level, I think there's a lot to tweak here that needs to be tweaked. So I'm excited to go against the grain here a little bit. I'm not kind of in that mindset where I'm really proud of the team. I think I expected a little bit better. I will stand by it. Someone asked me before the game, is it a failure if we don't win the league given the injuries and the fact that it's in Atleti's hands? And I stand by it. Yes, it's a failure. I think we lost this a long time ago. I think it's not about what happened these last few games. It's not even about what happened with the handball and the non-penalty or the penalty thing with Militao against Sevilla. It's not even that. It's before that we lost the league. So I just want to point that out before we dive into it. And I also want to say, this was not a flattering game for Real Madrid. The 2 goals, I'm not sure what happened to Villarreal's defense in the second half. It was kind of weird. It's also very strange for me because I was going to go to that presser tonight and ask Emery about the way basically they took Vinicius and Asensio and the wingers out of the game, and just to speak about the defense a little bit and also their press resiliency. And I kind of had to just scrap the question because their defense just fell apart. And even on the 2 goals we scored, I'm not sure what the marking was going on there. But so yeah, I just want to say that I might be a little bit more critical than most tonight. I think there is a lot of room for improvement in this team.
Yeah, I think I'll be kind of there with you. I don't know exactly where. We'll see what you have to say. But I thought this was a really poor performance for most of this game. It was sort of classic Zizou or classic old Zizou. I don't know if it's as representative as the guy we saw the last 2 seasons, but in that something about the thing looks a little shaky. The original game plan maybe not completely on it, and then he makes a bunch of sort of, I guess, strange substitutions. Like I definitely did not expect Casemiro to come off. I can't remember when's the last time he's done that. But ultimately, I think it ended up being actually kind of positive. And so that's the second set of changes, and we'll get to that. And it ultimately ends up leading to a win. And there's something, I guess, a little poetic about how that went down. But to quote Zizou, who said this many times, and I guess we're not going to hear this again for a bit, but we suffered for a lot of this game, especially in the first half. And there's something really weird going on with our pressing, as I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, in terms of the larger part of the picture, I actually went down and charted down all of our injuries just to kind of give me a picture of what it was like. And as expected, there's a huge concentration of October and November. I think November was actually our worst month in terms of, the extent of all the injuries, but also just the amount of players that coincided. But I do think it's worth pointing out that the majority of these came to our defense and where we had the most depth. And so I just want to get it out of the way. I do think the injuries are a legitimate factor to consider in terms of what held us back this season. Though I don't know if you chart it all out and consider game by game who had the better squad coming into each game. I don't really think it's enough to say that, okay, because of the injuries, that's it, right? We can't win a league title. And there's 2 main reasons for that. One, I think we had an underrated level of squad depth versus the other teams in the league, especially in defense, which is where we saw the majority of our injuries. Obviously, Carvajal, Ramos were basically out for the season. They weren't factors. But Militao was available for large part. Lucas Vazquez was available until recently, and then we had to bring in Odriozola. And then the big one really was Mendy, right? who was basically there the entire season. And then he goes down in that April period, and that's where we have to call upon Marcelo. But for the vast majority of the season, we were able to have a pretty solid defense given the injuries that we had. But again, not to say that means, okay, yeah, I mean, there's no issues that Zidane has to deal with. It still takes some skill. It still takes some managing to ensure that we had a good defense. But if we look at the defensive statistics in the league, it was actually pretty good, right? Defense wasn't necessarily the problem. It was offense, and we actually scored, I think, the exact same amount of goals as Atletico Madrid in the league, which is something I didn't realize until very recently, right? And if you look at our midfield, the main injury is Fede Valverde, and then Casemiro, Modric, Kroos were remarkably resilient. Together, they only missed 8 games throughout the season. And then in attack, I'm not even counting Hazard because, in my opinion, you needed to come into this season assuming that he would be a non-factor. That was my position that I very explicitly stated at the beginning of the season. It's not something I'm saying now. Big one was Rodrigo, who was out for basically a 2-month stretch. I think December through or the end of December going into February is basically when he was out. But otherwise, we largely had the attacking pieces that we needed. And then this is what everyone overlooks, and I'm not really sure why, but we knew we couldn't anticipate that there would be this many injuries and this many repetitive injuries. Like Ramos himself suffered like 8 to 9 injuries or something, which is like, we're getting like to 10% or whatever of the total number of separate injuries we've had was just on Ramos. But we knew that this would be a physically draining season. We knew there would be a lot of injuries, even if it wouldn't be that many, because everyone knew, right? Intensity dropped off for 95% of the teams across Europe in anticipation of this. There was barely any time for preseason. It was a congested schedule, right? We started very late September and we're ending, before June, right? If you think about the season. And yet we got rid of Odegaard, we got rid of Luka Jovic, and someone is at fault here is basically my point, right? Like, it just can't be a season where we pass through and it's like, oh, we didn't win the league title because it was just all bad luck and that's it, right? Like, if it's not Zidane, then the players didn't perform in particular games where we could have won. If it's not the players, then I think, maybe it's Zidane who didn't do some certain things in games, not being able to utilize a different type of play to keep players like Odegaard and make them useful. Like, if Fede Valverde is having injury troubles, right, you're relying on 3 central midfielders, I'm not sure it necessarily makes sense to let this guy go. Whether or not he's happy with the playing time he has, it seems that we're very good about Zidane and the people in charge are very good about being harsh and making cold and calculated decisions when they need to put someone on the field. But as soon as a player is like, oh, I'm a little unhappy with the situation, suddenly we're extremely gracious and we're like, oh, well, then you can go, right? We'll let you go. Like, we're being good guys, right? It's what we did with Marcos Llorente. It's what we've done with a number of other players. And it's just a bit of a weird mentality for me. So my point, in which I've been like saying, I guess coming around to very messily, is that someone is at fault here. I think this was a very winnable season, even taking into account all that we've said, and not winnable by a lot, right? I don't think we could have ran the league given the issues that we had, but I think we should have won it. Like, we'll talk, everyone is focusing about what we did and all the issues we had, understandably, because we're all Real Madrid fans and this is a Real Madrid podcast. But Barcelona are terrible without Lionel Messi and with the coach that they have. Just because of Messi, they had the best offense in the league, but defensively, they concede a goal a game. They're terrible defensively for a title contender. They were, I think, 10 points behind the league in the first half of the season. Like, everyone thought they were out of the picture. And then Atletico Madrid basically collapsed coming into the final stretch of the season, in large part because they had a stretch of where COVID hit them, took out their starters, and Atletico Madrid's depth is terrible. Like, outside of their starting 11, they just don't really have players who can fill in like we did in defense, right? And you can plan out, oh, well, we don't have depth elsewhere like midfield, right? We got rid of our depth in part, like with making decisions like Odegaard. So I don't think this was by any means like a horrible league, campaign. I think if you were taking it on the balance of things, I think we did okay. I think Zidane, you could give a lot of to Zidane. You can give a lot of credit to certain players, especially our midfield, which just basically played every single game possible without anyone who had the potential to come in for them. I thought maybe Isco was underutilized, but it wasn't until late in the season that we realized he could actually be a factor. But ultimately, the question is, did we put ourselves as an organization, as a coach, as players, did we put ourselves in the best position to win the league title given the circumstances we had? And I think people are really letting someone off very, very easily if the answer to that is no. Because if I think you take it on a game-by-game basis with the squad and 11 that we had out there, I don't think we did all of what we could in every game. And I think you're correct, Kian. You have to look back to matches like Elche, like Osasuna, like Levante. Those are points we shouldn't have dropped. Cadiz. And even if we didn't have our starters, are you telling me you'd trade a single Cadiz player for the player we had on the pitch? No, you wouldn't, right? Like, we had the superior 11. So that's my kind of take on it. I guess we just decided to get to it now, but I think it's kind of good to kind of get that out of the way in terms of, and I'm sure we'll loop back to it, but that's my general feeling on it, right? Did we, if we're really looking at it and we want to be honest with ourselves, look at the squad we had on a per game basis and consider the games that you think we should have won, and then consider, did we win it, right? So when you take that into account, and the fact that, in my opinion, we faced the worst league contenders since 2008, I really do feel like we should have got this league title. I do believe we could have squeezed in 3 or 4 more points from some of those matches where we dropped points. And so this is a disappointment to me. It's not a disaster. It's not a disaster to lose a league title by just a couple points and you took it to the final day. But I don't think it's good, and I don't think you just brush it aside, because there are many, many questions we still have to answer, right? If there's no issue, then we could just go into next season with the same squad and assuming full health, we'll be like, oh, that's it, right? If you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, oh, there are some issues here, the squad's not good enough, and at the same time, it was everything was fine, right? So I guess we'll get into the game and talk about how some issues there popped up and how that shows stuff we need to solve moving in. But yeah, I'm more in the middle, right? I really cannot say that we did a horrible job this season, because that's not true. I don't think that's defensible. But this idea that it was all just heroics and everything was against us and we did everything we could, I find that hard to defend as well. And yeah, I guess I'll just kind of end that spiel there.
I just love how you take a machine gun to me, and just pump me with bullets of all these talking points, and I have to choose now which one to take. I think let's remind me, by the way, to come back to that what you said about letting players go like Llorente, like Odegaard, and as if like somebody's forcing us to do it. And whether we should keep players against their will or whatever. That's an interesting discussion. I think we should circle back to that. There's no doubt what this team went through from a health standpoint was insane. And particularly for me, when it peaked, like you mentioned November, I think just because it all happened to our back line just recently, that one was even trickier to navigate, because it was like every single one of our backline positions was decimated. That, to me, the whole wave of the defensive line getting decimated, but really throughout the whole season, I was impressed that Zidane, the way he navigated that. I really was. I do think the second leg Chelsea, which we discussed to death, how we were disappointed with that. Injuries or not, with the way he approached that game and the way he did not adjust to it, and the way he, after the game in the press conference, he said that there was no need to adjust anything. We just needed to basically keep knocking on the door. I think it's frustrating that really all you needed to do this season was be like 1% better, like marginally better, and just have any kind of production from the wings. Any kind of production from the wings. Like 1% uptick could have won us the league and should have won us the league this season. Again, in one of the worst Barcelona teams I can ever remember growing up, possibly since the mid-2000s or so. And then you had Atletico team, which is a pretty good team, and Luis Suarez was an amazing acquisition. Llorente really coming into his own, stuff like that. They're also they also dropped quite a bit of points. I mean, it is interesting. So you brought up the stats that we've scored the exact same amount of goals as they have. Our defensive stats, I mean, they're just a better team than us, but not by much. And both Atleti and us overperformed our XGA a little bit. We got a little bit lucky that we didn't get more goals conceded against us, but it's not like we weren't that far off from each other. And the main difference was basically that they won one more game than we did, and we drew one more game than they did. And I think it just basically comes down to the little things, Olm. I mean, you look at the playing time. It really, maybe it went under the radar a little bit that Rodrigo played less than 1,000 minutes this season. A lot of that will have to do with injury. He did miss some time. And I think it's worth revisiting that maybe if he's a little bit more healthier, that could be the little difference. Because remember when you, Matt, and I were going through Rodrigo stats mid-season, we were talking about how he's basically number one in everything per 90. And it's fun to revisit that at the end of the season now. He is second in the team in goals and assists per 90. He is second in the team in expected assists. He is a player who actually has some efficiency to him. And maybe if we get a little bit more of him. And I think that's the one position of all the positions that get sorted out. And by the way, I think it was a little bit premature that everyone said that we're saying goodbye and to 8 players and Zidane and all this. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen. I think it's a little bit too soon to start saying goodbye officially. We really don't know. But out of all the transitions and things we need to address, I think we need to address what the hell is happening on the wings. And whatever we decide, it's going to be a tricky decision either way because we do have Bale coming back and we still have Hazard on the books. So that's 2 spots right there. We're not sure what to do with and how to basically get rid of those contracts. The other thing is we have a pretty efficient Brahim Diaz in AC Milan right now that I'd really like to have a closer look at. We still have the whole Odegaard thing happening. So to me, it's the wings that really need to be addressed. We need more productions and we need more help for Benzema. That's the main thing. If we just are any other version of Real Madrid except for basically this one, we score a couple more goals, we can create a little bit more offense and be less predictable. This is a league title in the wrap. So it's incredible that we couldn't pull it off in a season like this, if we're being honest.
So the Rodrigo one is the big one for me, actually. I mean, if people are looking for a singular excuse, I'm not sure the logic works that way. But Rodrigo is the one we all said at the time. Well, at least I know I said at the time that that injury really hurt because I felt like with how Vinicius was struggling, especially at that point in the season, that we could slot him in on the left and he could really give us something, even if it wasn't going to be this insane boost, right? It would be that marginal thing that might just put us over the top. And then he was out basically to the end of February. I'm not sure since then, right, March onwards, that we necessarily used him enough. He was available. And I know in certain starts, he didn't necessarily set the world on fire, but that's going to happen. He mainly came on as a substitute. If you just go through the fixture list and look at all of his games since he came back March onwards, he was available for a very sizable portion to end that season, and he just wasn't really picked as a starter, right? Asensio was given a lot of run time. I don't necessarily think it was wrong to give Vinicius a lot of game time because I think his best part of the season was that final third of it. But you can definitely make a case that there were certain games where you're like, okay, slot Rodrigo in over Vinicius if Asensio is going to keep playing, right? So that's the thing, right? It goes both ways. I think you can always point out things, and I don't think you're wrong to. It's about the balance of it for me, but you can always point out, okay, these are all the things that held us back. And then so on the other hand, you have to be like, okay, so when we were in certain situations where we did have players, did we use them to the maximum? And I'm not convinced that we necessarily did, right? And so it just is a tough one. But I find it hard to believe that it was just beyond impossible to find that 1%, 2% somewhere to win this league title, basically. Um, and that's just kind of what gets me, because coming into this season, I think everyone should have expected that we should be strong favorites to win. Then injuries happen, we get into the situation, and then I just kind of feels like the majority of the fan base is at a place where it's like this was fine, this is perfectly acceptable. No one else could have got us into the position that we're in, and I'm just not sure that's the case, right? It's this weird dichotomy between being frustrated with our offensive approach every single game, right? And the lack of diversity with it, and basically resorting to sending Casemiro up the pitch. And yet at the same time, from the grand perspective, being, saying that we did everything correctly. I'm just not sure the logic clocks out with all of the discourse that's been happening, because you notice a lot of frustration game to game, but then from the big picture, there's like this unexpected level of, I guess, acceptance and patience from this fan base, which is a little surprising to me. But I guess it's better than being like really, really angry and just getting into that mode, because at least we start from a place where we can have a discussion. But yeah, it did definitely surprise me a bit to see a lot of the post reactions, given how a lot of the anger and frustration I've seen on a game to game basis from everyone.
Yeah, I do think I would urge the fans to just maybe try to analyze this in the most holistic way possible, because I think you do see a lot of extreme takes one way or the other, depending on who you're a fan of. If you're a fan of the coach or a fan of a player, and you feel very strongly about a certain idea, there are the people who say this is Zidane for not inspiring the team. Others who say it's Vinicius' fault. Others who say it's Asensio's fault. Others, there's the player versus tactics battle. I just, there's plenty of blame to go around if you really wanted to. You don't have to put it on one person. You certainly don't have to put it on a young kid who really, in defense of Vinicius, he was accelerated like crazy. Like, I don't think, remember when Solari brought him in initially? No one, like that, I don't think that was the plan, certainly, like to bring him in from Castilla that early. He exceeded expectations in his first year, and now all of a sudden his expectations just went up through the roof. Is he on the level of a Sancho, of a Foden? No, he's not. Of course not. He has a long way to go. He has some promising tools to work with. I'm not saying that you can be patient with him forever with regards to his goal scoring and his finishing, but he's still really young. I don't think this is not all on him. I do think, while we can talk about Zidane's tactics and the lack of offensive ingenuity, I also think there are players in attack that were far too passive this season, and I don't know what else you want Zidane to do in that situation. Like Hazard, when he was on the pitch, was he doing anything? Asensio comes in waves. Today, both Asensio and Vinicius were ghosts in the first half, and Rodrigo had an impact when he came on the second half, so maybe that is some kind of indication for what we're trying to say. But if you look at this game, any time that Real Madrid did something, and it was kind of few and far between, it came off the back of a player taking it upon himself to break lines, whether that was Fede, whether that was Modric going through a dribbling sequence, whether that was Rodrigo in the second half. It all stemmed from those plays, and those are the plays that we needed more of this season, I think, that we just didn't get. So I think the blame can be dispersed. We don't have to throw it on one person.